everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. What's going on this week, folks? How are you feeling real 2003 in terms of barbaric military actions? Though I will say maybe the one difference is that when Bush launched illegal war against Iraq, does anyone care about legality when it comes to butchering a million people? I don't know. When the Bush administration launched their war, all the anti-war voices, there wasn't an outlet for them. And so it felt very small and frustrating then, in a way that it doesn't now, in the sense that you know that most people don't want this war. Most people don't want the Gestapo rampaging through the streets of America, kidnapping people and putting them in concentration camps. It's not stopping the psychopathic folks in charge from doing whatever they want, but at least you know that you're not alone in opposing the monstrous bloodthirstiness of the ruling elite. Guess that's a positive silver lining? Anyway, here's another silver lining. I don't know how to transition into today's episode. Here's another silver lining. Great episode today. This was wonderful. Today I'm talking to Amelia Fletcher from the band Heavenly. And if you don't know who Amelia is, I'm going to read you her bio right now. Raised in Oxford, musician Amelia Fletcher started playing in bands in the mid-1980s. Her first major group was Tallulah Gosh, which she formed with Elizabeth Price, and they released a number of singles before Amelia left and formed Heavenly in 1989. Heavenly released 4 albums on Sarah and K Records, but after a tragic event retired the name, and since then, Amelia has performed in a number of notable groups, including Marine Research, Tender Trap, and the Catenary Wires. Alongside her musical career, Amelia became a respected economist and academic whose accolades are too numerous to mention in a short biography, though one major point is that her work has been used to curb tech power in the UK, and due to her decades of service, she was appointed OBE in 2014 and CBE in 2020. Most recently, Heavenly has returned after their 30-year hiatus with Highway to Heavenly, which was just released last week on Skepwax, and regardless of the intervening decades, is as good as anything they've ever done. I was so excited when I heard this album. I've been listening to Heavenly since I discovered them at the radio station in college. And all of Amelia's work, I have a picture in my brain of when the Marine Research album came in, sitting on the shelf there in the DJ booth. But anyway, nostalgia aside, the album is fantastic. I have just been playing it repeatedly since I got it, and it is not hyperbole to say it is among the best music they have ever created. And Amelia is really cool. Why did I start out with some half-remembered thoughts on complexity theory or nonlinear dynamics and economics, which I got from reading Eric Beinacker's book on the origin of wealth? Why did I start out like that? I don't know. I was interested in Amelia's economic work as much as I was interested in her musical work, because I think the two are I was going to say conversationally with each other, but they at least those two desires or two things she wanted to do evolved in parallel with each other. So I thought that was worth talking about. I think Amelia's done some really incredible work in economics. From what I understand, I think the stuff she's done is kind of comparable to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau here. I mean, it's defunct now, as far as I understand, or it's been defanged or defunded, as has most of the American government that was actually doing something for its citizens. But, you know, in the years that the CFPB was actually working, it did tend to curb some of the excesses of the elite class. So I thought that was cool and worth talking about, but we get into it. Amelia's very cool. I hope you enjoy this episode. Before we get into it, though, coming up on the show, just wanted to flag a couple episodes coming up that I thought were really good. Julia Steiner of Rat Boys, John Flansburgh of They Might Be Giants, and I just talked to Connor Armbruster of the eponymous Armbruster. His new album, Half My House, is just lovely, and we have a great talk, so stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Amelia. If I can dive right in, because I am curious. I didn't know if... I think you have a very interesting background. And when I said, hey, what we talk about in the show, childhoods, you were like, oh, I don't know if it's that interesting. And I don't know if that was self-deprecation or if you really feel that. I'm curious as to what you meant.
Well, only that, lots of people had very tormented childhoods, and then that affects how they are as adults, and they can tell a really interesting story about the torment and how that changed them. And, I basically had a pretty happy childhood, so I don't know whether that's going to make it boring.
I don't think trauma necessarily makes something interesting.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, it's also like, I don't know, if you start talking to someone and it's just about a traumatic childhood, yeah, there's some kind of inherent drama just because of that's the way that movies and television shows are set up, or storytelling is set up in general, I suppose. But I don't think there's any necessity in a traumatic childhood to an artistic background or to something, or to any kind of I don't think there's any necessity in there. There's plenty of, this is the thing that I deal with on the show all the time, where someone goes they'll either be like, well, I did this as a child and therefore now I do it as an adult. And I'm like, well, I know plenty of people who are very funny people who did not become comedians.
That's true.
So there's never any necessity. So it's all these questions of let me ask this. Because when I was in grad school, I did philosophy and I studied nonlinear dynamics. And I'm curious, as an economist, does nonlinear dynamics ever figure into the picture? Does that ever figure into that micro churn? Does that ever figure into policy? Or does that ever figure into into how you're taught economics?
I'm not sure what it is. There's lots of non-linear stuff in economics, obviously, because the world doesn't work in a linear way. But it makes the maths harder when it's non-linear. But beyond that, I don't really know what non-linear programming is.
It was so basically this was developed in the 20th century. The idea that to really understand how large-scale systems work,
yeah,
you have to look at the way that things function on different levels of organization, and how on different levels of organization give rise to other levels of organization that may follow different rules. And that there are things like that, instead of talking about things in terms of say equations, you talk about things in terms of tendencies and in terms of feedback loops.
Okay, so in terms of purely the maths bit of economics, there's some of that has, I think, filtered in. But actually, what you may be referring to more is something called behavioral economics, which is where you take what we now know about humans and the fact that humans are not these kind of rational computers that a lot of economics used to assume they were. And you then think about, well, okay, that's clearly the right thing to be analyzing in the real world, because we are real humans, both running companies and buying things, and making policy choices, etc. And therefore, you need to make allowances within everything you do for real human behavior. So if that's kind of what you're getting at, actually, it's been a really big thing in economics, literally over the last coming up on 20 years. And it's probably the area of economics that I'm I focus on most.
Interesting. Because this is the thing, because I studied at first analytic philosophy. I've moved into a lot of different other kind of areas when reading philosophy now. I mean, obviously I'm not doing it now professionally, but I still read a lot. And in analytic philosophy, it was the same kind of assumption. Humans are rational at their core. And then I'm an adult now, and I'm looking at the world, and I'm talking to people, and I'm like, oh, I don't think you're... a lot of people I find have like incoherent political beliefs. They function very irrationally. Even if you tell them certain things about the world, and I'm not even talking about like conspiracy theories, although certain things have confirmed, say, certain conspiracy theories in the last couple weeks. I don't know why I'm being vague. I don't know how much you're paying attention, but they like dropped all these Epstein emails that confirm all these, like, not obviously the insane stuff in conspiracy theories, but a lot of the stuff about kind of like the ruling elite. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is insane.
Yeah.
All the stuff.
Certain conspiracy theories are not just theories, but yes.
But I was taught that people are rational at their core, right? And then I get out in the world and it's like, oh, some people I really like. I'm coming to some kind of feeling about rationality that like maybe it's paradigmatic. Maybe there are certain paradigms in human history where rationality holds a lot more power than it does, and maybe there's certain times when it doesn't. I'm curious, did you grow up with that understanding of humans or understanding of the world or understanding of economics? Did it change for you?
I mean, I guess when I grew up, I wasn't thinking about economics at all. In fact, I didn't even know what it was when I went to study it at university. I actually applied to do philosophy, politics, and economics, and I was excited about the philosophy and the politics, and I didn't really know what the economics was. And then I got into it. When I got into it, I realized that it's inherently simplistic because it's really, really hard to analyze the real world. So you have to kind of create a simplified view of the world. And I guess I didn't realize at that point quite how much of an effect assuming rationality was having on all of the models. And so over the last, as I say, couple of decades, that's been much more my focus, and realizing I do particularly the economics of markets. So how firms behave, how consumers behave, and how once you take into account consumer behavior, you realize, that competition can do all sorts of weird things because it's about firms trying to serve consumers, but if consumers aren't choosing well, then they'll be trying to serve them in some other way. And also that firms have a real incentive to try and distort what consumers do, because then they can also make more money. So once you take those into account, they're pretty big kind of findings in terms of how markets work in particular. So that's the sort of thing I have been focusing on. But I have to confess, I guess I probably did know all of this when I was a kid. And then I kind of forgot it along the way of becoming a professional economist. And then I came back to it. One of the interesting things, though, in economics is if people just behave completely irrationally, you can't really... Economics is about predicting things. And if people behave completely irrationally, you can only predict that things are unpredictable. But you can't predict much more than that. But what's really the key insight from kind of behavioral science is that people are predictably irrational. And so they will show particular biases. They will always, choose from the highest ranked thing on a list of things. They will choose the default. They will choose the default option, etc. And once you know that there are those kind of predictable biases in human behavior, then you can do something with it in terms of them predicting the implications.
Okay, interesting. When you say you knew this as a child and forgot about it, there's I was about to say theory, and then I'm like, this is not a theory. This is a thing I've noticed sometimes on the show, is that someone is a way they are in their childhood, and I'm being so vague because this covers so much. You repress that, or do something with it. May not be necessarily repression, but maybe you just you maybe transform into something else. And then sometime this happens mostly to people who make art in whatever myriad ways you make art. To become a real artist, to become a conscious person who is like making decisions in art and not just kind of like whims, right? It feels like you have to bring that childhood self back in some way, or return to it, or incorporate it into who you are. It usually happens sometimes in your later 20s. And I'm curious, is that what you meant by that? Or like, what do you mean by when you said you kind of forgot about it and then remembered it?
Well, I guess in economics, I guess I forgot about it because I was just learning whatever everyone was telling me. And then I kind of remembered, oh, okay, I need to apply a more critical focus here. That's a bit different to my art. I'm just trying to think about that. I mean, in terms of music, I mean, I guess the music that I liked when I was a kid still influences me today, in that, even just if I'm playing a chord pattern, I'm quite sure that, the chord patterns I end up liking are similar to the chord patterns that I liked as a child, which would have been what my parents were playing and things. So that I'm sure, and maybe, but yeah, maybe I don't know if I ever quite forgot that though. So maybe it's not a great example.
I mean, it doesn't have to. Again, these are broad spectrum things that don't apply to everyone. But there is. I don't know what the connection is. I do think there is something interesting in that you get taught these things, and then there's something that pries you apart, where you have enough self-awareness to be like, well, this isn't necessarily right. Because when I was in grad school, there were plenty of people, like, here's the thing that really, like, annoyed me so much that I eventually left. I was in a Greek philosophy class. We were doing Aristotle's Metaphysics. And the professor, he was a classics guy who then became a philosophy professor because we needed someone who like could read Greek. And he was telling us about the origins of metaphysics. And basically, like, those aren't even the book that you just get at the library or at the bookstore, right? That is actually Aristotle's students' notes. And the original scrolls that they were on disintegrated in the 9th century, somewhere around there, right? So what we have are copies of copies of copies. And if you're the classics professor, what you have is a book that has the first half of the page is the text, and the bottom half of the page is the errata from the like 5 or 6 canonical copies of that. Okay? And what he was asking us to do was come to some kind of truth about what Aristotle was saying. And I said to him, I go, well, we don't know, because what we have are students' notes, the original of which disintegrated, and then we have a bunch of different copies that have different copying errors because of, people are just writing on like parchment with like a quill, I suppose. I don't know. This is all in my brain. I don't know how you copied scroll. I don't know what monks were copying scrolls. Like, where are we getting like this?
Probably don't know.
I'm like, there is no truth. There is we can say some stuff about what we think that that Aristotle was saying in this stuff, but there's no. I felt like arguing over like, what did Aristotle say, which is what I was supposed to do, which is what I was taught to do in grad school. Argue over, come to a position.
Well, I mean, actually, you were being asked to argue, so that was, I think, good. But one of the things that put me off, actually, science, because I did all sciences. I was good at science, and I did all sciences till the end of high school. And I remember that we do a set of exams when we're 16 in the UK, and then we do another set when we're 18. And when I'd worked very hard and got my good marks in my 16-year-old exams, then went in to do my science A-level the next lot, start the course. And the teachers basically said, okay, forget everything you learned before, because that was all a massive oversimplification and much of the time wrong. And we're going to tell you more stuff now that you have to learn for your next lot of exams in 2 years' time. But if you go and study at university, you'll discover that most of that is wrong as well. And I remember thinking, why have I got to learn all this wrong stuff? It's just, it just seems wrong. So I guess that's a bit similar. And I guess maybe it's a bit similar to the economics thing as well, which is in order to get people to learn stuff and understand things and kind of get anywhere with a subject, sometimes you have to massively simplify. But then it's incredibly frustrating when, like, that the thing you're trying to have a discussion about isn't really the thing that you're trying to have a discussion about, in the case of your Aristotle's lectures. And likewise, science. So it is, I guess it's a tension. Sometimes when I teach, I mean, it's not dissimilar. I will say a thing. I will always try and teach true things, but I'll know that there is a kind of big, kind of huge amount of stuff lying under the thing that I say, that if I was in a room with someone that really knew what they were talking about, we could have a huge argument about whether what I said was true.
Do you think that in general, that before this moment where you're just like, wait, why did they tell me all the simplified stuff before that was like pretty inaccurate? Do you think you were apart from the way other people thought in general, or do you think that was a moment that pried you apart from the group?
That I don't remember anyone else thinking that, but I've never asked them. I mean, I was obedient and I still did learn all the stuff. I just remember thinking it was a bit pointless, and it's probably why it was pointful to get my exam, but it was pointless otherwise. And I think it's why I then stopped doing science and moved away from that. In terms of whether I'm just the kind of person that takes a slightly different view on things, I guess maybe I am. I mean, I was the person at school that liked weird music, and I was, or even wanted to be in a band, that everyone else thought that was a slightly weird thing to want to do. So, yeah, I mean, maybe my brain thinks in slightly different ways from some other people, but I guess everybody's brain works in slightly different ways.
Maybe. I don't like, I mean, yes, sure. Like, if I'm being charitable, yes, yeah, sure. People are lovely in all of their myriad differences. And then I go out into the world and, I'm having the same conversations with the same people, and it's very boring. I am curious, though, were you okay liking quote unquote weird music? I was the same way. There were like a couple, I had like a very good friend who we liked Pavement, and we liked indie rock and in high school, and we were there were 3 or 4 of us maybe at most that liked quote unquote weird music. And then it felt alienating, and I'm wondering, did it feel alienating to you? And were you okay with that? Or did that bother you?
It's interesting. I think it was alienating, but I think I quite liked it. I quite liked the fact that I liked music that other people just didn't really get. I mean, when I first started liking music, I liked, much more standard things. But then I got into the stuff that was, I guess, sometimes more depressing. And then that kind of took me into stuff that was more just odd. I ended up liking, one of my favorite things when I was about 17 was I had a little Sony Walkman, and I used to tape songs off the radio on it. It had radio and cassette. And so there's a show in the UK called John Peel, and he was a very famous DJ who played kind of fairly obscure things. If you were listening to John Peel, you were already reasonably into obscure things. And I taped this song by a band called The Pastels, who are still one of my favourite bands to this day. And Stephen from The Pastels has this kind of very low, drawly voice, Scottish, and kind of out of tune and very Yes, slow. That's terrible impression, by the way. And anyway, so I listened to this song back after listening to it the night before I taped it, and I was loving it more and more because the out of tuneness and just was just brilliant. And I played it to my friend Vicky, who was kind of the other person who was into odd music alongside me at school. And she was like, this is not good. This is really, really not good. And then I realized that actually my batteries were running out on my Walkman and it wasn't meant to sound like that. And I will never be able to capture what it sounded like again, because obviously with batteries, it doesn't sound anything like the same. But I love that sound. And that was what really originally turned me onto the pastels. And then after falling in love with the pastels at the wrong speed, I went and found out about other bands in their kind of scene. And I really love, one of the things I love about music is there are these little genres, little communities. And once you've kind of found one, you can go deep into it and find other people and feel part of something. And I guess at school, I felt different, but I felt in this little community, I felt, I felt it was quite welcoming. I mean, I was younger than everybody else, but it felt, I felt I could be myself, and it was good.
Could you not be yourself outside of music? Just like whatever your being is, could you be that fully in school or with your family? Or was it only in this community that was connected by musical tastes, that you could be who you are?
That's interesting. I mean, I don't think I was not me, but maybe I was looking for something to differentiate myself from other people. I guess everybody always is, whether they're wearing, a silly sequin top or whatever. Everyone's trying to differentiate, particularly at that age, trying to find their identity. And maybe I found that was just the identity I found for myself, and other people would have found, I don't know, library nerd or whatever as their as their identity. And maybe that's the way I could have gone, but it isn't. Yeah.
Well, how obsessed were you with differentiating yourself? Because I found that for a long time I was absolutely obsessed with, I got to be my own person. And then that goes too far. And then in the dialectic of growing up, I guess, you like swing back to like, all right, well, okay, these musical tastes that maybe only a couple people like, that's fine. But maybe you should watch an action film every once in a while so you can actually have a conversation with someone. And it's not all Park Chan-wook or whatever.
That is a really interesting point, because I think that I did go pretty deep into the music thing. And then I did find it quite hard to have conversations with people that weren't in that world. I mean, obviously I've learned over time, but I still don't find it that easy, because I still don't watch like action movies or the most popular shows. I still don't do lots of the kind of standard things. I can't really talk about, hey, I got a really cool time on my run this week, or I can't do those things. I can talk about the weather because I'm British, but and I can talk about politics because that's something I'm also really interested in. At the moment, fortunately, everybody's interested in politics, so that's kind of easier. Normally, I'm a bit on my lonesome wanting to talk about politics. So, yeah, it is. I guess it is. You've identified a interesting thing, which is the more abstruse you get and obsessed, the harder it is to kind of engage with the real world. Maybe it's good that I was also an economist, because I've had to deal with normal people.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I know you've said, and I read some interviews with you where you were like, well, I didn't want to do economics necessarily.
Yeah.
Right. But you did. And I'm wondering, there has to be something there, like, unless it was just like, this is purely just a job. And I really am just doing it to support my family or so I can make music. It doesn't seem that the offices you've held does not seem to say that this is just a job.
Yeah, no, that's true. So I got into it because of music and wanting to carry on doing music, and therefore staying on to do postgraduate, masters, and then a doctorate, basically because I could put off having a job and focus on music alongside, obviously, because I'm a reasonably diligent person, getting doing all the work. But it is true that since I've been working as an economist, I have found it kind of fascinating. And I think I'm really lucky to have such an interesting job. And I mean, I'm still in this position right now where I'm kind of torn between the fact that I'm doing really interesting economics work at the moment and the fact that the music has taken off to some extent. And I'm actually probably more torn than I've ever been about how much time I ought to be dedicating to those two things, partly because when I had a normal economics job, I didn't have a lot of choice because, it's a normal day job. You have to just spend the time that you have to spend. And if you're going to spend that time, you make it as interesting and fun as possible, but you've got to spend that time and it reduces the time you can do with music. I actually now have changed that around. So I'm kind of basically working for myself and doing lots of freelance stuff. And so I do have a bit of a choice about how much I do of the two things. And it's a bit, I'm a bit torn. Rob, my husband, would love me to just do the music. And it's not just money at this point, even though the economics definitely pays better than the music. But it's more, I find it challenging in a different way. And I also feel, so most of my economics work these days is helping cases be brought against big tech firms who have behaved badly in court.
All of them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have no time to bring personal cases against all of them. But yeah, so there's a couple that I'm involved in cases against. And so I feel like I'm doing good work.
Yeah.
There as well. So it's not morally, and I feel ethically fine with it, and I also find it really interesting. So trying to allocate time, prioritize is not straightforward at the moment.
Yeah. No, I understand that. I want to say, I wrote down 2 words that you've used so far to describe yourself, or at least describe yourself when you were younger. You use the word diligent. You also use the word obedient. And I am curious, because there seems to be a tension between describing yourself like that and making music or being an artist in general. It feels like, and obviously everyone, I am generalizing as I want to do, but like, that doesn't always mean that there's going to be tension if you're an artist. Maybe you follow all the rules. I don't know how you do that, but like, at least, especially the people I talk to on the show, but I'm curious, is there tension in there between those two parts of you?
I think that's really what I think the diligence fine. I think lots of musicians work really, really hard.
Yeah, sure.
But I think the obedient is something where it's probably harmed me over time. In that I think that I have, I mean, an example is that when we were in Heavenly, at the start of Heavenly, we were quite outspoken in terms of the treatment of women in music, and also we were just generally feminist, even though I didn't kind of give myself that terminology. But it took until we discovered Riot Girl a few years later for me to think, oh, I could put some of these ideas into my songs. And I could sing them in a slightly more aggressive way, and we could play them slightly more aggressively. I was like, oh, and so I think that I kind of almost felt like I'd been given permission by Riot Girl to change how I was doing things. So I think, and what that means, I guess, I have not tended to make too much of a noise about things. I've tended to just kind of quietly go about trying to make music, trying to make the world a better place. I mean, it's true in economics as well. I kind of tend to try and get places by telling a good story, by running a good argument, rather than ever by being aggressive. I try and kind of be likable, and then if you like me, well, why don't you listen to what I'm going to say? And then
Okay. Is that a strategy or is that constitutional? Like, is that like, I really do not enjoy confrontation with people unless I have to. I find a lot of arguments, especially now, where I'm just like, you don't, I'll argue with someone. I'm like, well, you just don't understand history. You don't have the facts. I can't have this argument with you. Like, you can't argue with fascists. They have their own, they live in their own reality, say, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like, I'm like, I don't know how to argue with someone who lives in Narnia. Like, I can't argue through the wardrobe, I guess, if that's what the metaphor is.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think arguing with irrationality is a different sort of thing. But I guess I guess what I was thinking about with music and feminism is I wasn't, even though I felt outspoken, I wasn't outspoken at an earlier stage. And even though I felt it was kind of, I mean, I didn't think of Riot Girl, basically, put it that way. Other people thought of it. And I think took a certain willingness to non-conform to be the inventor of it, even though I was enough of a nonconformist to then want to be part of it.
Right. Okay, well then, where does your nonconformity start? Like, at what point, what's the earliest where you were like, well, something about whatever, mainstream culture, something about Oxford, whatever, where you grew up, your school doesn't feel right, and I'm going to follow my own path.
I mean, I guess I was never the kind of super popular, sociable person at school. I was never bullied particularly. I got bullied a couple of times, but I guess I was always a bit more into doing my own things, a bit self-absorbed, and didn't really always know how to talk to the other people if they were talking about football or I don't know. They would be interested in different things than me. So I guess that is true from a really young age. It may be partly because my parents were basically pretty intellectual. My dad was in advertising and wrote lots of books. And my mum was an artist, although an unsuccessful artist, but she's mainly a housewife, but she also did a lot of art. And so I had that. And then I went to, particularly when I was younger, I just went to a very normal school where people's parents were dinner ladies or truck drivers or whatever, normal jobs. And I guess I did feel different, even though I didn't really know why I felt different. And I in retrospect, it's kind of a class thing, and it's embarrassing that I felt different because of class. But I guess I did. So I guess that what that made me do is, I'll go away and do my own thing. I think that was probably, even though I've never been diagnosed with anything, I think I was probably a bit autistic as well, because I used to do things like so my dad got me this little one-arm bandit machine. And so you got your three little things that came up, and I remember becoming really interested in what the likelihoods were of all the different options. So I literally did it and wrote down every single option for like pages and pages, and then added them all up. So I'd worked out my likelihoods. And in retrospect, I don't think many people I was 8. I don't think many people in my class were doing things like that.
Hey, you were just curious. I know that there was some Taskmaster. My wife and I got into Taskmaster last year.
Right.
And it saved our emotional states from what's happening.
Yeah.
And we've just been like tearing through series after series. And there was one of them where it was something about like using a loo roll they had to like unroll the loo roll. And there was something about like, or about estimating like how many pieces of paper were on one. And I remember I'm like, that's actually interesting. So I started to look up like how you would actually figure that out from just like, say, if you took a ruler and figured out the circumference, how you would figure out how many pieces of paper. I think that's just curiosity in general, where you're just like, oh, is there a way? There has to be a way, right? There has to be some calculus for like
Yeah.
a equation for figuring that out just from like, say, the diameter. I guess it was the diameter that I was thinking of the loo roll.
So now you've said that, it's a really fascinating question, and I want to know the answer. But I think you call that curious. I call that curious. I don't think everybody would find that a particularly interesting question. Or at least they might find it an interesting question and then go straight on to the next thing. Whereas you and I might kind of go, oh, how would that work?
Yeah. I mean, as evidenced by the fact that I have spent the last 5 years reading as much as I can understand every scientific paper I can about COVID, where I'm just like, oh, it's this.
Mm.
Uh-oh. And
Yeah.
everyone around me is just like, whatever. Like,
I have to admit, I stopped doing that, but at the time I did read a lot, including loads of kind of medical science papers that obviously I had no skill in reading, but you get the hang of it after a while.
yeah, you do. You get the gist of things. You can't, obviously, like the heavy duty, I was going to say biological equations, whatever is in the sciences as far as I go is physics. So when it comes to, and a little bit of chemistry. So when it comes to biology, I'm just like, I guess there's some measurement of fluids or something. I don't know what's going on there. Even though I can, I guess, kind of read like Schrodinger's equations on waveforms, I kind of understand it.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm being self-deprecating. I'm like, well, I don't understand biology, but I can read Schrodinger.
I can't understand. I can't read Schrodinger. But I think the other thing that I've realized is that thing of a little bit of knowledge. It can be quite a dangerous thing. So my daughter probably won't thank me for saying this, but we thought she had scabies recently. Because she's a student and it's very common in students here. And she went to the doctor and the doctor said it. And so they thought that was what it was. And so there's kind of medicines, but they weren't working. And so I ended up looking, trying to be like the person that knew the most, who wasn't actually a doctor, about scabies medicine. And I was like, what new trials, all these sorts of things. And of course, in the end, what happened, we tried her on all sorts of things because I was like doing all this research. And in the end, she went to a good doctor who basically said, you haven't got scabies, you've just got an allergy. And so actually, that was a real classic of me going, oh, well, obviously it's scabies, and obviously, therefore, we have to look at every possible paper.
But what I think is interesting, and I think this also applies to being a good songwriter, is that curiosity. Is the curiosity to be like, well, you know what? I'm going to try to write a chord progression that I haven't really heard before. I'm going to try to write a melody that doesn't just follow kind of like 3 notes that are in like, a standard pop song or whatever like that. I think there's a core there that is both in your economics work and in your amateur medical work and in your artistic life.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I mean, you do definitely... it's been really interesting going back to Heavenly after all this time, because, I've not written Heavenly songs for 30 years, and I had to think, what is a Heavenly song? What was I doing at the time? And actually trying to put myself in that place. What are the things that excite me about chord progressions? What are the things that excite me about lyrics? But then also thinking, well, I'm much, much older. So how do I write in a way that is true to how I am now, but equally is still heavenly? So actually it was a real kind of quite an intellectual challenge. And also at the same time, everything going on in America was kind of influencing me, and I was kind of thinking I wouldn't normally write songs about politics, but I just can't help it because it's too big. So I think that it's a mixture in writing songs of a curiosity, a desire to do something at least a bit new, but also kind of there's all these different things weighing upon the songwriting, and you just want to sound fun and lightweight. even though you're thinking all these really reasonably difficult things. So yeah.
Well, that is the joy of a pop song, is that, or at least in the, I don't know about mainstream pop song. I don't listen to a lot of Sabrina Carpenter or any,
No.
but is that you have a lot of it is a pairing of like darker lyrics or like more real, more honest lyrics about either the world, about relationships, paired with something that is like extremely catchy. And that's, I think, what really appeals to me personally.
No, I mean, that's what appeals to me as well. It's kind of the opposite. I mean, I like Sonic Youth, but it's kind of the opposite to Sonic Youth, because Sonic Youth is all about kind of the interestingness of the sound. Whereas with Heavenly, I try to make, it should sound interesting musically, and it should, but it's actually meant to be quite catchy and like fun to dance to and sound reasonably excitable, but then hide within that kind of pop kind of outer coating, kind of something a bit deeper within. And that's kind of what we've done kind of always, but particularly after we got into Riot Girl, we thought we would carry on having the music not sound that dissimilar, but have the lyrics kind of pack more of a punch. And I guess that's still, so when I thought about what Heavenly is, that was kind of partly what I thought Heavenly is.
You said your mom was an artist. What kind of art was she making when you were younger?
Well, when I was a kid, actually, basically, so before I was a kid, before I was born, she was an art director in an advertising agency. So she'd studied illustration at art school. And then she was an art director, which meant at that time, I mean, that job just would be completely different now. But, you'd think of an ad campaign, and before you ever even got a photographer involved, you would draw what you wanted the picture to, the things look like, or if it was going to be, film, which was very unlikely at that time, you would like plot it all out and draw everything. So her drawing skills were kind of really important. Nowadays, this can be completely irrelevant. But she was older than my dad, and she'd had time to get sick of it.
Interesting.
and he was a bit younger, and he was a kind of client-facing person in an ad agency, and he was kind of a rising star. So when they had me, she basically said, "Can I stop now and you can carry on?" So she did, and she didn't really do any art for quite a long time, except kind of with me. And then when we got a bit older, me and my brother, she started doing screen printing, and then latterly she did quite a lot of etching. And then in the end, unfortunately, she got Parkinson's, which may have been partly to do with the not dealing well with all of the various chemicals involved, particularly in the etching. I don't know. But anyway, so and she's not around anymore. But
you had an example, though, in your life of someone early on making art, right?
Yeah.
Like just like as part of their life. It wasn't, was she trying to show it anywhere, or was she just like, I like doing this and this is enjoyable?
At that point when we were kids, just doing it. Later, once I'd left home, she did try and show it in a few places, not particularly successfully. But it was just for herself, I think. You
said your dad wrote books. Was he writing books about advertising, or was he writing fiction, or just about a completely different subject?
He wrote one fiction book, which I think is pretty terrible, but he was successful in writing books about advertising and management, managing creative people. Actually, there you are.
Wow. So do you watch Mad Men and you're like, oh, this seems familiar? This is like watching my parents.
I think that, it's a little bit like that. I mean, I think their lives were a bit less glamorous than the American Mad Men, but they were just as drunken. I mean, God, I think this is the other thing about my parents relative to me. I mean, they drank a lot. And throughout their lives, and also lived it quite large. Like they'd have really nice food, stay in really nice places. And I've never had a taste for really doing any of that much.
So they seem kind of just like larger than life a little bit, at least the way you just describe them.
Yeah, they were a bit.
So how did you develop? Because I go back to diligent and obedient. as two descriptors.
Yeah,
Also
they
curious, but like, how do you develop as that? Is it just like in opposition to them?
they were really hardworking. So I think that, again, the diligent, I probably copied them, but actually they were not very obedient. They did. No, I mean, my mum would have arguments all over the place, which I guess as a kid I found really embarrassing. So maybe that led to me not wanting to get into the arguments. And my dad, I mean, I don't know how obedient or non-obedient he was, but he kind of made things happen for him in a way that I guess suggests a lack of obedience. There again, I've kind of made things happen for me as well. So I guess you can be obedient and make things happen for you.
Well, do you make things happen for yourself within the rules, or do you make things happen for yourself by stepping outside of what's expected?
I mean, it depends by what within the rules. I mean, I guess I don't break the rules, but equally, the rules don't tell you everything. So in my economics world, I guess I've made a name for myself by being pretty outspoken, not argumentative, just outspoken on various topics like big tech, like behavioral economics. I've been the only person, out talking about those things. I've been out a lot talking about those things. So I'm kind of, I get a name for being the person that talks about those things. So I guess I guess I'm obedient, but I have always been willing to be a loner, and do my own thing.
And that's even in childhood, because you said that about like your friend, where you played the slowed down pastel song for your friend, and you're like, this is amazing. And you're even because I remember back to like, I would have the same feeling as you, but I just wouldn't want to like argue about my taste with my friends. So they would listen to Metallica, and I would be like, this Fugazi song is great. And I'm like, but I just wouldn't want to play it for them because I don't want to have to like argue Fugazi versus Metallica, I suppose.
I guess I only did it with her because she was the person that had the most similar taste. So I figured she'd like it. I mean, I wouldn't have dared play it to anyone else in my year because they'd just have gone, what is this rubbish? And she liked a lot of what I liked, but she didn't like everything I liked. So I also liked lots of after I got into, I went down into the depths. I really liked a lot of quite, I guess these days you'd say girly pop music, but kind of reasonably badly played, but kind of with a real spirit. And she didn't really like that. So she went with me a certain amount of the way, but she didn't go all the way. But by that time I had kind of other friends. So
so the other friends were almost like a bridge that allowed you to then, all right, this is what I really wanted, or this is what interests me, and I can dive into that because I have these other people that are kind of giving me the space to feel it or be it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what happened is you gradually form a little community, don't you? So I was at Oxford studying, and at Oxford, I mean, even worse than my school. I mean, I thought there was absolutely nobody that would like the same music as me, which is reasonably established by that point. But I did have a boyfriend by that point who I'd met. I took a year out before university, and I worked in a record store in Oxford.
Cool.
And so I started going out with Pete, who is in fact in Heavenly and still in Heavenly, although no longer my boyfriend. So I got him kind of into a lot of the same music as me. So I had that. And then when we wanted to start a band, I was actually he was in a band himself. And I went to one of his band's gigs. It was a tiny little thing just in this college bar. And I saw this girl just standing at the side, and she had a pastels badge. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to do it. So I just walked up to her and said, do you want to be in a band? Obviously, I had no band at that point. And she said, well, I can't play guitar, but I do have one. So yeah, why not? And so she joined Tallulah Gosh, which was our first band, and actually wrote some amazing songs on the guitar that she'd just bought and didn't know how to play. she was part of the gang. Then we needed a bass player, and a friend of a friend told us about this bass player who had reasonably similar to us music taste. And so we went round to his house, and we never asked him if he could play bass, really. We just looked at what records he had. And that passed the test. So he was then in the band as well. So that band was entirely based on the people who I thought had the right taste.
Okay.
But that's because I wanted to build a community, I guess, almost more than a band.
I see that. But so was it just that feeling, I need to build a community, that gave you that ability to be that bold? To just ask someone? Like, I've talked to people before who have been that bold on the show, and it's always like kind of like blows me away, where I'm like, yeah, maybe once I'm comfortable with someone, like after a while, then we can talk about creative endeavors together. But just to like walk up to a stranger seems to me so bold.
I don't think I had any clue what I was doing. I had no real clue what it involved being in a band. I didn't think about whether she could sing. I didn't think of actually whether she was nice. I didn't think about anything.
Nothing. Any kind of like whether you're compatible in any way.
I was very lucky because it turns out that, she's been a lifelong friend. Her boyfriend of the time has been a lifelong friend. So.
But what was the input? What makes me curious is that impulse. Was it just, did you even think about it beforehand? I know this was a while ago, but like, or was it just, I am so compelled, I'm just by this, oh my God, we like the same band no one else does that I know of.
So I think I had been thinking it would be really good to have a band. I did actually have a band when I was at high school, which I didn't mention, which is a kind of, with these three lads, it was kind of a gothy thing, not really my top favourite kind of music, but, it gave me a bit of an insight into what it was to be in a band. But then I really, I decided that it would be good to have a band that was more aligned with the music I wanted to make and the bands that I was listening to. So that was in my head. I can't remember if I'd written any songs. I don't actually think I had written any songs, but I just thought, I want a band. And then I was in Oxford feeling pretty miserable, to be honest. It was my first, I was from Oxford, so I was in a better position than a lot of people. I already had a boyfriend, my brother lived nearby, my parents lived nearby. So yeah, it wasn't so very bad. I just didn't hang out with students. I hang out with all the people that I knew already, but I didn't every student that I met, I was like, oh, I have nothing to say to you. I don't know how to do this. And so when I saw Liz, and she kind of looked really gothy, but she looked kind of striking, and she looked cool. I just thought, okay, well she might do. She's at least worth going and talking to.
So there was a rational choice beforehand. It wasn't just an emotional pull that like.
No, I think it was a bit more of a strategy. It just was an ill thought through strategy.
No, that's familiar. That was the first 30 years of my life. Ill thought out strategies. Yeah. So, okay, we're towards the end of the show, and I'm still, one last thing that I'm still curious about is, what was the phase change? What was the paradigm shift from you going to someone who likes music, who's maybe curious about things, to someone who wants to make it themselves or wants to write their own songs? Or if maybe it didn't even start with music, maybe it was some other kind of art, but like, where was that change in you?
I think that I always wanted to do it somehow or other. So even when I was a tiny kid, I used to, I went to see Annie as a kid on the stage, and I was like, right, I want to be Annie. And I had, my parents had many huge benefits, but they weren't the least bit interested. They weren't at all stage parents. They weren't into drama. They weren't into music particularly. They liked jazz, but they never thought of music as something you would do. And so when I said I want to do Annie, they were like, oh yeah, right. And I used to go out into my back garden, and we lived in the middle of nowhere, and sing songs from Annie at the top of my voice, kind of thinking someone might walk past and I'll get discovered. So I guess, and I was really young then. And I even made my hair like the girl from which is pretty grim. Anyway, so I guess that I had it in my head.
In shape, hold on. In shape or in color or both?
Both. It was kind of
interesting.
No, so it wasn't like that really crazy Annie. An earlier Annie. It was a bit more just wavy. It wasn't that kind of Shirley Temple crazy thing. And then I guess some of the bands that I got into when I got a bit more kind of first was not properly kind of into cool music, but a bit cooler than everybody else's music, were bands with girl singers. Like I got really into a band called Altered Images. They were actually a pretty popular band. But I really identified with the singer, Claire Grogan. I just kind of thought she was very girl next door. And I just kind of was increasingly thinking, ooh, could I do that? And then a band called Bananarama started. And when they first started, they were really girl next door. And I was like, ooh, I reckon I can do this. This is before I kind of got into proper, indie music. But then at school, I ended up hanging out with, I guess, the music type people. And then some of them started a band. So I was like, let me be in the band. I can sing. It turned out I couldn't sing really, but and I couldn't really at that point. I couldn't really play guitar. I mean, I could sing, but I couldn't sing I couldn't translate it into the band very well. But that band, we did a few gigs, but it gave me a taste for. And it wasn't I think there was one song that I kind of semi-wrote. Mostly they were written by the boy, who in fact, the person who wrote songs in that band was actually ended up being Adam from Swerve Driver, if you know that band.
Yes.
So he knew how to write songs. And so I didn't really try. But then when we finished at school, they basically terminated that band and then restarted a band without me.
Oh.
It's okay. We're still friends. But that was fine because actually I knew they wanted to go heavier. They were into MC5. They were into kind of making interesting experimental noises on their guitars. And they knew I was into like more pop songs. So it is, but I guess I'd already tried it out. And when I was in that band, it was very much just about doing something fun with my friends rather than I'm going to do a band. But it obviously wasn't a huge leap to then go, actually, I'm going to do a band that is kind of aligned with the music I like.
So it was just a journey of like small little discoveries that kind of pushed you eventually over to like, oh yeah, this is what I like to do. This is what I want to do. Like, yeah, that feels right.
I think that's right. And actually then through time, I've tried to stop several times. Like I stopped Tallulah Gosh because I was coming up to my end of university and I was like, I'm too old for this now. I'm just going to focus on the real world. And then I kind of missed it. So after a year, we kind of started Heavenly. Then we stopped Heavenly because my brother died. And then I was like, I'm done with this. And then again, after a year, we missed it and we started a new band. We had kids, we moved to the countryside, we stopped doing music. And again, oh, no, we miss it. So it's kind of, I guess, there's something in me that finds it pretty addictive. And whether it was in me from the start, that I was going to find it addictive, I don't know, but it's certainly there now.
It seems like a very nice place to end. Amelia, thank you so much for joining me. What an absolute delight to talk to you.
And you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye.